to the fourth session of the People Like Us Wellbeing Mental Health Chats. We're here, so the People Like Us project's hosting a series of wellbeing mental health chats with our partners from NHS West London. Today, we're joined by Ruth, an occupational therapist at West London NHS Trust. Today, she has joined us to discuss mental health issues for BAME students and staff. During the session, we will hopefully answer some of your questions that you may have around this and provide you with some wellbeing tips. So we would really love your feedback on the sessions as always. We'll put some comments in the comment section. We'll put in 2 questions and we'd love to hear back from you. And we'd also love to hear back from you on topics that you'd want to hear as well for the next session. So welcome, Ruth.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all keeping well. I really appreciate you taking your time out this Thursday and joining the webinar. Means a lot, so thank you. And I'd also like to thank the University of West London for having me here. It's always interesting to have these discussions. As in perfect world, there's no way I would talk about this situation. However, sadly, we do live in a world with a lot of intersectional inequalities for a lot of people with colour, and the ideology of equality resembles a dream for many, in many ways. One of the things I'd like to talk about today is the idea of mental health, as I guess in a particular vein lens of inequalities with BAME students and professional staffs and the impacts it has on them whilst they're in higher education. So as we all know, the transition to university, as well as navigating university life, can be extraordinarily stressful. Therefore, universities are then obliged to figure out the best way to support the mental health needs of students. But we all know that in particular, BAME students are on the margins and are very vulnerable in so many ways, such as dealing with the impacts of racism, which can affect their mental state whilst at university. According to Mind, which is a mental health charity, a lot of BAME individuals continue to experience differential outcomes within the UK mental health system, despite the increase of attention within this area. It is important that I articulate what that means. So in terms of behavioral cognitive interventions, for a lot of BAME individuals, that is something that they might not have a lot of knowledge about. So often, the first intervention that may be a drug intervention. And obviously, we do know from existing research that talking therapies tend to be more beneficial in terms of making sense of why you have encountered something and conceptualizing and really being able to articulate that experience in one's mind as a process of realization. So I suppose one thing that I'm also going to unpack here is that the trauma of racism for BAME students and professional staff within higher education, which still remains problematic against the backdrop of cultural and organizational institutional racism. So why is this problematic? This is problematic because the Macpherson report, which referred to this matter in 1999. However, 23 years on, we still live in a society that is a downfall and cascaded throughout varying interventions, of which education, as well as higher education, is one of them. When we think about higher education and its mantra that all people are equal and all people deserve equal rights, it's almost a province of a perfect hybrid utopia of what multiculturals resemble. However, actually, the concentrator to that is in many ways as higher education is actually one of the most complicit institution in advancing racial inequalities through various systemic mechanisms, such as through promotion, through diversification of staff, through lack of belonging, through curricula, and through many different kind of instruments that align with a guess of tools of whiteness. There is a thing that Zeus Leonardo speaks about in terms of how whiteness occupies centrality that affects or contradicts notions of belonging, inclusion in many ways. So I suppose one of the many things that is interesting is to think about how racism manifests in overt and covert forms. And I think one of the things that is really important is that increasingly we do gravitate towards the overt form of racism. But actually, as I said, racism has become a lot more intelligent. And while, for example, in US, we continuously see those overt forms of racism play out in various ways. In the UK, it is more insidious as it's a lot more intelligent. And actually, the way it works is more covert. So it's more like a slow burner than it itself over a period of time compromises wellness and compromises mental state. So I do want to elaborate that all mental health matters as opposed to one particular group. But what I am suggesting today is that there has been a dearth of research specifically in the unique experiences of BAME individuals encounter mental health in a particular altered mental state as a result of racism. So I think it's important as well that we acknowledge significance of continual and residual trauma. So it is the idea of encountering the first laceration of terms of racism, and then you're in a situation where actually the blow itself is penetrative, but then the after effects of the aftermath of the experience is also traumatic. It is really interesting because that kind of residual drama, it sticks with you. So if I refer to a personal experience of racism at the time when I'm dealing with it, it's very powerful. And you deal with the experience by trying to make sense of that experience. But actually, in many cases, it often takes a separation as there is not a symbiosis between the actual experience and dealing with it. Often you encounter the experience and you're dealing with it for many months or even several years after. And there's always the questioning of why you didn't deal with it a certain way. For instance, speaking to that individual, and then the residual impact is actually quite consequential as it can affect us how one psychologically deals with it. So one of the things that's really important is thinking about psychological interventions and the impacts of the environment on racism and how we view it. As well as one of the things that's good for us is to recognize is that we do have healthcare professionals within universities. However, a lot of personal experience as well have led to suggest that a lot of these healthcare professionals do not actually have the understanding of what racism feels like, as they often do trivialize the experience or actually look to deflect or in some case gaslight the experience and use the reductionist methodology and suggest that actually is one being hypersensitive or are they misinterpreting the situation? But actually all of that is the experience of the first violent encounter. So almost becomes like a double violence encounter. For one, when you, for instance, one, experience the racism, and two, you go to a mental health care professional at your disposal within the institution you work in, and that experience in many ways is reduced to hypersensitivity. Within that, there's always the afterthought that becomes intensified as I spoke about the residual aspect of it, which kind of really brings the anxiousness. There's isolatory aspects of it, and there's kind to really context around marginalization and how that works, how that works has a physical form of racism. You physically look to exclude someone from being part of something or part of an agenda or discourse from a group or community. So I suppose one thing that I think is really important again is really the idea of discriminatory patterns, particularly in healthcare experiences, but also within higher education organizations. So what does the discriminatory pattern looks like? What do they impact the way people think? Do they impact the way people engage with their peers? As white individuals, that may be in the university. how have they behaved when they have seen these instances happening? And I think it's really important to think about this, because in the current time we're engaging with this, in this current time, we are engaging in a society of allyship in the wake of everything that is happening. So it's important to acknowledge what white allyship looks like in relation to watching someone in the BAME community encounter particular types of discriminatory patterns, phases, and racism as we know it. So that kind of allyship becomes really important, because one of the things that kept coming up when I was researching is that there's a complicity that is encountered sometimes with white individuals and within higher education institution, actually observing this ongoing and recognizing that it is actually not a good thing, or you're fringing on someone's personal liberties, but actually not saying anything to the perpetrators of these kind of acts of racism, which makes the situation a lot more intense. So it's just also about, just to sum it up, it's just about people that are around as well, just having the awareness of exactly what racism are, as it's demonstrated in overt and overt ways. So in overt and covert ways, sorry. So the covert ways, it'd be good if those around can actually take accountable and maybe speak to others that they see are discriminating against other people, and just pulling them up for it and educating them as well, as not everyone might be aware as that some things can come across as racist or not.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, have I cut you off?
No, that's it.
No. Yeah, I think that's a good point to leave on, accountability and just recognizing it and also addressing it, and can help you as the individual that might face something discriminatory, and also by raising it and educating other people, it can help as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you so much. It's been really insightful. It's been a really interesting session that you've done all the research on it. It's really all the facts and stuff so thank you for joining us today and
No
running
problem.
this session.
Is there any questions that I can answer? Or
Let me double check to see if we've got any questions come through.
Okay.
So I haven't got any questions, but like I mentioned earlier, if you're watching this later on, if you have any questions, please just pop them in the comment section, and we will pass them on to Ruth and get back to you with the response. Again, we'll also put in our questions for feedback on the session. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What else do you think we can do? What other topics you want? So please do like and comment. But yeah, for now, thank you so much, Ruth.
Thank you.